Good afternoon and welcome to the February 22nd of 2022 Policy Management Committee meeting. We have a full agenda today, so I will start by having my colleagues introduce themselves. Dr. Daka.
Good afternoon, Judy Daka.
Great to see everyone. Shebra Evans.
Good afternoon, Hannah Linney.
And I'm Rebecca Smondrowski. Thank you all very much for being here and for your work on this stuff. I do want to check to see if any committee members have any questions or edits about the December 9th informational summary. No? Okay, well then none. I will assume the summary is approved. So we can start with item number 3, which is policy ABA, community involvement. We've been reviewing policy ABA to ensure that there are sufficient public participation opportunities for students, parents, guardians, and community members so that their ideas, interests, and concerns are considered and valued in board and MCPS decision-making processes. We reviewed an initial framework for this policy at the October 21st Policy Management Committee meeting. The policy revisions were presented to us at our December 9th meeting of 2021. And we provided feedback on those revisions and asked that it be brought back to the committee for review again today. So with that, that's where we're at, and I will turn it over to staff to introduce yourselves and begin. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Leslie Turner Percival, Legal Director of Transactions and Policy in the Office of General Counsel. The committee will recall that you previously reviewed a first draft of this policy on December 9th. And at that time, presenters from the Office of Strategic Initiatives provided you with an overview of community engagement priorities captured in the first draft. They also provided the committee with a summary of a preliminary stakeholder engagement process to consult with stakeholders on the development of the draft. Today, we will provide a summary of some of the themes staff heard from additional reviewers who commented on the first draft. We will then walk through some highlighted changes that reflect work since December 9th. Mr. Landsman, Mr. Hernandez, Mrs. Frost, and Ms. Kune, and other members of their team are here from the Office of Strategic Initiatives to discuss the additional feedback they received. Evan?
Thank you, Ms. Percival. Good afternoon, Ms. Mondrosky, Dr. Doka, Ms. Evans, Ms. Oluni. Before I start, I want to acknowledge Ms. Oluni. You went to Parkland Middle School, and we're talking about community engagement. My son, my youngest son, goes to Parkland Middle School. He came home, and the first thing he did when he came home that day was talk about you. And I want to let you know the impact that it has, your visits in schools. Good afternoon. As I said, my name is Edwin, and since our last meeting, we incorporated your feedback into the draft policy documents. We spent a good amount of time looking at the bilateral communication techniques for engagement and making the language stronger in the draft document. So as a process, we engaged with a larger committee of MCPS staff and members of the Black and Brown Coalition. And based on our conversations together, here are some of the additions we made to this draft policy. One of the things that we did at the beginning of the policy is we added culturally responsive and anti-racism approaches. The community advocated that without specific language, the policy is open to interpretation and it can lead to downplaying the significance of race and how we engage the community. We also looked at the culturally responsive and anti-racism approaches in the way that we made this explicit in training staff and how we implement these strategies for community engagement. We also look at the bilateral communication and the reciprocity of the board engaging the community and the community as well engaging the board. So we wanted to highlight that the board encourages for the community to initiate engagement opportunities as well that of issues facing the community in MCPS. We also want to bring to your attention that we went and looked at the different methods for engagement, and we were more extensive in how we defined those, as Dr. Daka also recommended on door knocking methods as well. And one more item that I want to bring to your attention is that we have to understand in the last 30 years how the demographics of student enrollment in MCPS has changed. And in understanding that, we need to have that broad spectrum of culturally, linguistically diverse community in mind when we engage the community. And I'll pass it back to Ms. Percival.
Thank you. Ms. Davis can now walk you through some of the changes based on public comments.
Hi, good afternoon. So let me just work through a couple sections. So as Mr. Hernandez mentioned, right on the first page, I just want to highlight that update about to affirm the board's commitment to the development of inclusive, culturally responsive, and anti-racist engagement guidelines. The word commitment was something that some of the feedback was looking for a commitment to engagement. Let me take you over to page 6. Another update that was requested was we wanted to emphasize that the board itself was a participant in these engagement efforts. Let me take you to page 7, if I could, please. So at line 181 to 185, we're getting at this issue of the bilateral engagement. So here and elsewhere, we have a mention of community-initiated engagement in decision-making processes and welcoming the multi and varied opportunities for the community to raise its aspirations, concerns, and analysis of issues facing MCPS. Let's go over to page 9. So beginning at line 240 and following page 9 and page 10, we substantially worked this suggestion at the committee's recommendation to better explain some of the possible methods of engagement. So we group them, you'll see beginning at 244, community-initiated methods of engagement, public testimony, correspondence with board members, invitations to board members or to MCPS administrators to attend meetings of community organizations. And then we wanted to think about broad outreach. So these would be for the purposes of informing, but also for gathering input. So broad public outreach through surveys, public comment data capture, community events, door-to-door contact, or other methods of receiving and analyzing public input on a large scale. And then we wanted to talk about facilitated small group discussions of various sorts. So these could take place in person or in virtual space, where members of the public can introduce topics of interest, raise questions, or discuss content or questions prepared. So this could take in the form of public meetings, open invitation public meetings where participants are provided the opportunity to engage in facilitated small group discussions. Study circles are a specific type of this, where leaders and participants receive training needed to participate in challenging conversations and seek common ground. Focus groups by definition typically engage people who have something in common. So focus groups of participants typically selected on the basis of some common interest or experience. And task force or charrettes, which by definition are typically people with a certain technical expertise. So typically composed of participants selected on the basis of their technical expertise to analyze technical issues. And then large group forums, large group meetings where participants receive information in a public forum, provide testimony or ask questions, or in this larger forum may be broken down into small facilitated discussions. So let me take you over to line 12. This was a request to the committee to include a description of participants who participate in these activities. Page 13 at line 337. Again, this is, this was a request from the committee to affirm the power of the engagement directly with the school and the community and to use that channel as best we can. And then over on page 14, we reworked this section, the desired outcome section, in response to comments. Who benefits? So we wanted to make clear that it is students who benefit, but community also wanted to articulate what is the benefit to the community. And so we added this line about will be well informed, understand the issues and opportunities, alternatives and potential solutions that shape the board decision making, and community stakeholders will have multiple and varied opportunities for their aspirations, concerns, and analysis to be heard. Those are the big ones. Oh, let me move to the last one, page 16. The other thing we heard was it's important that participants hear feedback on how their input was used. So we've included that, line 416 to 418. Board will seek appropriate strategies to inform engagement participants of decision-making resulting from their engagement. So with that, we are ready for your discussion and questions.
Thank you. I appreciate the changes that you made. I'm going to let my colleagues jump in here. But so if anyone has a question, please feel free to turn your light on. But I am going to just quickly ask, one of the things that we discussed in terms of concerns was providing clarity on the fact that the feedback is that it's feedback, it's valued, but setting expectations for if outcomes don't turn out the way it's expressed. And I'm just curious as to how that was identified in here. And I'm not sure that I think that on page 16, number 3 is fully.
So what we lay out at page 4 was a framework that makes clear what the purposes of the engagement are, the purpose of informing, to provide information, consulting, to obtain public feedback, involving, to work directly with the community to make sure public concerns and aspirations are understood and considered, and then collaboration would be a further level of formulating recommended solutions and incorporating their recommendations. Would you like us to add something further about the decision-making being the responsibility of the board?
I mean, I will defer to my colleagues some here, but to me, I guess I kind of thought that perhaps even if, somewhere in number 1 of definitions, maybe it prefaced with while, the board or the superintendent has the authority to make recommendations based on, having incorporated feedback, and the board has the ultimate decision-making process. But, we'll include the feedback. I worry that, because I know that people have felt very disappointed and like we're just checking the box. And even as specific as we might be in here, if we end up not utilizing some of it, then it comes across insincere. So I just want to do whatever we can to clarify that for people. And like I said, if any of my colleagues want to jump in, please, as you know me, I'm not formal, so. Ms. O'Looney?
Did you want to say something? You're good. Okay. Yeah, just following up on Ms. Mondrowski's comments, I think one thing that might help address her concerns about community members feeling like their participation isn't valued is maybe on page 16, the subpoint 3 that was just added. Not just informing engagement participants of the decision-making that resulted from their engagement, but also how their engagement was incorporated or used or considered.
Yeah, I know that that's in there somewhere else, but maybe adding it here again would be kind of reinforcing.
Yeah, and then I had a separate question, page 11, number 7. Prior to its action on decisions about which the board has requested community engagement, the following information shall be included in materials provided for the board's deliberation. Can we include something about making that publicly available? It doesn't have to be the details of the names of the participants, but and preserve some anonymity, but just so the community knows how they were consulted.
Do we put that, like, so in other words, these public comments that we've received, are they up somewhere publicly? Just out of curiosity. I've never looked, because it's always been provided to
How
me.
it works with this committee. I can't tell you how it works with other committees. So I don't know if the process, I can speak for our process with you directly.
Sure. Just to clarify, Ms. Mondrowski, when I was talking about making it public, it's just these on page 12. A summary of the community engagement activities, a summary of how students were engaged, and a summary of preferences identified.
Oh,
Just
okay.
that, making that public.
Okay.
That
Well,
report.
Yeah, because you mentioned on page 11, and I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah, just that part, that report.
okay.
Yeah.
So just the reports. Got it.
So an example would be you got a one-pager
Yes,
in your documents.
Correct.
Prefacing our next item.
yep.
So that's the kind of thing we were envisioning, and we do that regularly with you. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure how other committees handle.
Right. Each committee handles it differently. Okay. But yeah, do you want that, are you requesting that it be specifically listed in here? I mean, like I said, I'm fine with it because it is a practice we already do, but,
Yeah, I would like for it to be, because right now it just says included in materials provided for the board, but
okay,
be made available publicly and for the board. Something like that, yeah.
okay. Anybody have a problem with that? No? Okay, great. Anyone else?
I just want to comment, this is a really great policy. I appreciate all the work that we've done on it and the feedback that you've taken from board members and put it in there really quickly, so I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I don't have any questions or issues with what we have, and I was going to comment on Mrs. Mondrowski's comment earlier. I think what she was getting at, and I'm sure you all understood that even during public comments, we always say we'll take your comment and feedback into consideration. But she is right. She's correct. And sometimes people make the assumption that serving on a committee and giving that feedback that every single thing will be taken into our work. And so I did want to acknowledge that, so I understand what you're saying, so.
On page 4, in D, you did talk about collaborate, and we were talking about that at the last meeting, that some of this needs to come from the public, and they need to feel like they're formulating, and that we're not putting it together and then saying, okay, what do you think? So thank you for putting that in.
Okay, so we mentioned a couple of little changes, but I believe that though you can make those, and then we bring this on to the full board for review and a vote, right? So unless anyone has any objections, I'm going to recommend this be moved to the full board with the changes mentioned. And we can move on to item 4. Thank you all very much for your work and your time on all of this. So while you all are changing, I will give the little bit of the background on policy JGA, student discipline. So the Policy Management Committee initially approved the draft revisions to policy JGA to address restorative practices and trauma-informed interventions on February 18th. We renewed our review of this policy at the October 21st, 2021 committee meeting, and we voted to have the policy sent to the full board for tentative action. The draft was presented to the full board for tentative action on December 2nd, and it was sent out for public comment. We have been provided the summary of public comments, and today staff is going to walk us through the latest version of the proposed policy revisions. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Joining us at the table today is Mrs. Jarambi from the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Schools. We're here today, as you mentioned, to review public comments received on policy JGA, student discipline, which was out for public comments from December 13th until February 7th. We will give you a summary of the comments, some of the major themes expressed in those comments, and then recommended changes in response to those comments. In summary, we received 158 comments through the public comment website. One comment we received through email to the board office. And of those comments, 123 were from MCPS parents and guardians, 17 were from MCPS students, 17 were from MCPS staff, 24 were from community members, and 2 were from the University of Maryland School of Law students. I'd like to provide Mrs. Jarambi the opportunity to speak a bit more about the types of feedback received.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up with a little bit of what was just stated about the audience that we saw. So we were very fortunate to make sure that this was something that was presented to a student audience. We had the opportunity to speak to SMOB, which included about 175 members. We had the opportunity to speak to staff through PLC, as well as to meet with the MCCPTA through the Diversities and Equities initiatives. And I think that's really important to note that we have folks from a wide variety of audiences and interests making our comments. So there are many different categories were you to categorize these comments, from support to opposition. And the one theme that I saw most highlighted is the support with consideration for. Like there was a qualifier with a lot of the comments. So we support this, however, it needs to be implemented appropriately. This is supported, however, there needs to be consideration for funding, staffing, and training. Support, however, we need to consider racism as one of the considerations for trauma. Right? And then there are, of course, operational comments. So this isn't a typo. Please reverse these words. This is not clear. Please break down this abbreviation. And then in terms of opposition, there was opposition with also considerations or concern rather than consideration. And those included considerations for the victim. Those included considerations for re-traumatization. And they also included consideration for a concern for unequal or unfair treatment based on race or ethnicity. So those were some common themes that occurred, and you'll see those throughout in different comments. However, most of the support with consideration that we saw were not things that are to be written in or outside of policy. They are things that must follow policy. And so I would say the biggest thing to think about is not necessarily just the policy itself, because some of what is asked for is not written in policy, but to be clear in our communication about what happens as a result of that policy, and to be clear in our communication to our constituents about how policy is supported, implemented, and enacted.
Thank you. Ms. Davis can now walk you through some of the changes based on public comments.
So we did make a number of changes. I'll start, I'm not going to hit every single one of them, but let me hit some of the big ones. I'll start on page 3. So one thing we heard in a couple different comments was the need to address parents and guardians' roles. So we did make a couple updates there. So you'll notice lines 57 to 60, the board affirms parent guardians as essential partners in establishing and maintaining positive, respectful, orderly, and safe learning environments. And I'll follow up with another one in a few more pages. There were some comments about wanting to see that students are valued and trusted, and that discipline will follow from there. So lines 63 to 69, that every person is a valued member of the community and is trusted to contribute positively to its creation and maintenance. When the community is disrupted, education leaders will understand, acknowledge, and address the causes underlying the disruptions. The learning environment is restored, and students are afforded opportunity to learn from their mistakes, etc. Let me take you to the bottom of page 3. As Ms. Duranmi noted, a number of people wanted to see what is the implementing language for this, and this is intended to be a philosophy to override a number of issues, and so we thought maybe we better say that a little more clearly. So beginning at line 84, a philosophy of behavior intervention shall be clearly communicated to students, staff members, and parent guardians through codes of conduct and implementing regulations that establish expectations of conduct and set forth consequences to address student behavior that is not in line with the student code of conduct. And just so that the public understands, there, for example, we had some questions about discipline with students with disabilities. We have a separate regulation for that. You know, there are various ways where we do have separate implementing language, but in the board taking this position as an overriding philosophy, that informs those implementing documents throughout. Wanted to be sure, there were some comments. We wanted to be sure to communicate that nothing in this philosophy is intended to undermine the bullying regulation, the sexual harassment work, all those other processes that are very spelled out, either in our own regulations or in state requirements. Nothing in this philosophy is intended to undermine that. And then the language at line 103 to 104, the board has already taken a position about hate in policy ACA, but we thought it was important to bring it over here so that we align with that, that school and work sites will be equitable, safe, diverse, inclusive, free of discriminatory acts of hate, violence, insensitivity, and disrespect. If I could take you over to page 10. This section is not changed, but reorganized. It seemed like possibly something was getting lost. We did want to understand that nothing in this philosophy changes that when a crime occurs on MCPS property, law enforcement responds. And because some of the comments seem to confuse that. But there are a number of implementing documents about how law enforcement is brought in, and crimes will be responded to appropriately. So where this looks like new language, it's just reordered to emphasize that a little differently. And then finally, on the back page, page 12, here's another reference to parents. This language was here, we just thought maybe it would be best to bolster it a little bit, that this is another reference to parents and guardians and their role. So the existing language had, allowed for schools to develop school-specific codes of conduct, and here we're just saying that community engagement in school-level codes can support parent, guardians, families to understand their roles, responsibilities, and rights regarding student behavior and student behavior intervention strategies. And with that, we are ready for your discussion and comments.
Great, I appreciate that. A couple of questions of clarification, first of all, that I wanted to start with, and that on page 12, item 2, each school may develop its own code of conduct. Can you just please speak to that a little bit more? Because, we've talked in the past about the concerns about consistency in schools and things like that. And so we have a code of conduct, a student code of conduct that comes from central office, and the board approves. And so can you just speak to that a little bit for some clarity on what that involves for each individual school?
I can speak, I can begin it, and I wonder if Ms. Jeremy could follow a little bit. So one thing you'll see in the code of conduct is that, like a classroom might develop a code of conduct. This is how we talk, this is how we respond to each other. So in the student code of conduct, that is encouraged, and there's kind of a model provided for what a classroom code of conduct might look like. Schools are similarly provided that opportunity, but you'll notice at line 321 that there will be a review of those. So student codes of conduct developed at the school level are forwarded to the superintendent of schools designee to review them to ensure consistency with this policy, regulations, and the district-wide code of conduct.
Okay. And now I'm assuming when you talk about the community engagement in here, you're referencing basically like the school improvement committees that our schools have and groups like that, right? Okay. And then I have two other quick questions. One, we've had conversations about the elevated punishment for crimes of hate or offenses, hateful offenses. To use examples that we've discussed before, a student drawing something random or destruction of property essentially versus putting something offensive or hateful on destruction of property. Elevating that in terms of the penalties and disciplinary responses. Can you just speak to how that is emphasized here?
Sure. So you will see in the student code of conduct that hate is a factor that's considered in the discipline decisions, and it's explicitly referenced in the code of conduct. So I can refer you to page 4, for example, in terms of factors impacting discipline decisions in the code of conduct. Number 5, it says other mitigating or aggravating circumstances such as references to or the inclusion of hate language and or display of images and symbols that promote hate. And also in terms of disruption on page 13, using language or displaying images and or symbols that promote hate that can be reasonably expected to cause substantial disruption of school or district operations or activities. Also on page 18, specifically referencing bullying and harassment, which is another policy that we will be discussing here today. Using language or displaying images and or symbols that promote hate may be considered bullying, harassment, or intimidation. The board prohibits the use of language and/or the display of images and symbols that promote hate and can be reasonably expected to cause substantial disruption to school or district operations or activities. And then it's also explicit in the non-discrimination statement on the back cover, specifically listing some examples of discrimination includes acts of hate, violence, insensitivity, harassment, bullying, etc., and that the board prohibits the use of language and/or the display of images and symbols that promote hate and can be reasonably expected to cause substantial disruption.
So I appreciate that. Do we not think that that needs to be part of the policy, though?
You mean explicitly referencing hate?
As being an elevated level of disciplinary action?
So we can reference it the way we've also highlighted it in the code, and just as I've stated it here, so we can add that.
Okay, and again, I don't know that, I'm not sure how everybody else feels. I just know it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. Obviously, there are also different levels of intentional actions, and so you don't want to make it too rigid so that there isn't flexibility within the autonomy of the schools. But I feel like it's really important that people recognize that that's just not tolerated, and it doesn't start at the same level necessarily in terms of response from the schools. I don't know if my colleagues had anything they want to add to that or discuss about that. But Dr. Daka?
Also on page 13, I appreciate the fact that we have a description of disruption, because that's one of the items that has come up when we talk about Black and brown students, and it's they're being suspended for disruption, but what does it mean really? So there's some examples in here that I think are going to be helpful in order to look at that. So outside of these examples, well, I don't know. Sometimes we just don't know why these kids have been suspended, so I think this is going to be helpful.
Zerluni?
Yeah, I'd like to also echo Ms. Mandrowski's comments about making sure that we elevate hate-related incidents in here. I know number 2, there's specific calling out of sexual harassment, bullying, and harassment, and number 3 is an attempt, I think, at addressing non-discrimination. I think if we expand number 3 and address exactly what Ms. Mandrowski was talking about and saying that hate-related incidents in particular have a higher consequence, and that is the board's policy, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I agree that, to me, it's as simple as finishing off one of the sentences with,
Adding a sentence, yeah.
Crimes of this nature will, be elevated to,
Right.
Potentially higher levels of disciplinary action.
Because having it in the student code of conduct is good, but
Right.
I was out of middle school the other day without calling out names, and I saw an administrator literally pulling out this board policy and reading it so that she could determine what the best course of action was for an incident that had happened. So I think the more we call out that that's not something we tolerate in Montgomery County Public Schools and say that it's part of our policy,
Right.
that it deserves a stricter punishment, it's better.
Yeah. That's so funny. I appreciate the anecdote. Ms. Evans, did you have anything specifically you wanted to add?
Nothing to add, just, I always appreciate, Ms. Duranby when she comes to, before the committee, with her thoughtfulness as to the work that we were doing, and, in particular, sharing with us, summarizing for the community, because the board has the comments about the comments that were made in reference to the policy, that there needs to be clear communication and what happens after implementation, and just support around appropriate staffing. So just highlighting that and bringing that up and pulling that out for the community and just for the board to hear as well. So I always appreciate that. And you came to the board table on December the 2nd, and I'll just say this. We have committee meetings and we acknowledge and talk about all the good work and appreciate the effort And then when you come before the board, sometimes the committee members, we don't comment as much, but I did just want to make sure that going forward that I also reference, what we talk about in detail at the committee, because not everybody watches our committee meetings, or we like to believe that. And so we come to the board table, sometimes what we discuss here is abbreviated a bit, but there's a lot of work that goes into this, and so I just wanted to acknowledge what you do and what you have done and what you will continue to do, as well as Ms. Davis and Ms. Percival. So those are just my comments, but this was good. It's always good to update, and we just got to do better at making sure that we talk about what happens afterwards. And Ms. Davis, you highlighted and brought up that people do make the assumption that the work that we're doing will undermine the bullying and the harassment, and that is not the intention, nor will that take place. But it's always just good, once again, just to say out loud for our community what we're doing and what that means and the impact that it will have on our kids. And so we just want the community to know that we want everyone to stay safe in our school buildings, that's the adults and the students, and we try to make sure that we do that work in our policy and in the action that we take. So those are my comments.
Thank you for that, Ms. Evans. I did wanted to, because Ms. Mondrowski and Ms. O'Looney said something that was related, I didn't want to leave it on the table. Ms. Mondrowski, you asked about different schools having different codes of conduct, and Ms. O'Looney, you mentioned that seeing a principal take a look at the policy. I just wanted to re-emphasize that, and I speak to this as a principal, or as a former principal, that at the end of the day, what we look at is the code of conduct. And so when we say different schools have different maybe policies or code of conduct, we don't mean the body of this document that we all follow. What we mean by that are smaller intricacies. So a good example that I'm sure we can relate to is cell phones out at lunch, right? That's not written into the code of conduct specifically, but school to school, that will differ. So that's something that may be allowable at Eastern Middle School, but maybe not allowable at Redland Middle School. Same thing goes for things like tardies or things like that. So those wouldn't be written specifically here, but that's what that document refers to. I just wanted to make it clear that we all follow the same code of conduct,
I
the
appreciate
same
that.
policy, but sometimes there's small subtleties that are dependent on the school culture and environment.
Yes, I appreciate that very much, yeah. Dr. Doc, I still have one question, but Dr. Doc, you want to make your comments first?
Oh, it's just a small comment. I noticed that this is in English, so we might want to let the public know that it's in 6 languages, in case, well, anyway.
My final question on this goes back to the parent involvement and expectations. I think that this is, I appreciate the addition to kind of say what our expectations are in terms of, being partners with our parents and guardians. One of my concerns is comments that I've heard from parents who feel that their students were pulled into the office or to be questioned about an incident or something happened and they were sent to the office and then they're talked to without the parent having been notified first. What is our overall, I know our overall philosophy, I believe our overall philosophy on it is we, of course, notify the parents as quickly as possible. I understand also that things happen, and we try to react in a timely manner to situations. But is there anywhere that pretty well clarifies what the expectations are for our schools in terms of making sure that, like, for example, even if there is an incident that is serious enough where our police department is called, are the parents called right away? Do they have the opportunity to come to the school before action is taken? Things like that.
So I'm thinking of a few specific places where there are protocols set forth. Certainly where there are, like, bullying has its own protocol. Sexual harassment has its own protocol for how and when parents are brought in and under what circumstances. So I can think of those kind of elevated. And I'm just kind of thinking, as things become less severe, I would think, Mr. Ramey, would you like to comment on how principals talk to students and families?
Maybe not the legal part. So I think it depends. I think what's difficult about policy, and Ms. Vondrasky, we've talked about this a little bit, is that it ranges the full gamut from K to 12. And when we're talking about, and I'll use the word discipline because that's the word we were using referring to this policy, or behavior intervention, we think about it in terms of not just what is criminal. And that was something that was interesting about the comments. Most in opposition spoke to or about things that were criminal. But we think about it also as the 5-year-old that's in kindergarten that can't wait for his chicken nuggets that pushed in the lunch line, right? So making a policy that is general and broad enough to cover all of those things from the most severe to shoving in the line is somewhat difficult. So if a student pushed someone in the lunch line, of course we do take them aside and we might say, hey, why did you do that? What happened? What was going on here? How can we help resolve this? And it might not necessarily be a parent phone call up front before we have that conversation, right? But it depends. And so I think those things have so much variance that the answer to that would differ based on the circumstance. If we have a student that says, hey, he took my cell phone and she witnessed it, we might say, did he take her cell phone? Like, that's not something that we would necessarily call a parent for before we engaged in those conversations. So I know, and I'm not speaking about conversations outside of school personnel. I'm not talking about child protective services or police officers or anything like that. I'm talking about day-to-day incidents of behavior intervention that we deal with, which are the bulk of behavior intervention. So I would say we do sometimes question students before informing parents. However, we also know that it is best practice to make sure parents are aware. And as a principal myself, there are times where if I wasn't certain, I would put the parent on speakerphone and said, I want you to be a part of the conversation, and you cannot be. So I want you to hear what I'm asking about. But those tended to be in circumstances that were more sensitive. In some of your day-to-day, why were you running in the hallway? What happened here? That might not happen. So I can't speak to it in policy. I can only speak to it in practice. And in practice, I would say sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, but it is best practice to contact the parent.
So I understand that, and I appreciate that very much. It is a wide gamut, and I get that. You don't want to not talk to a 5-year-old about standing in line. However, 5-year-old runs out of the school building and is brought back. Parents need to be there when people are talking to their children, regardless of whether it's...
Mondrowski, may I add just a little
Sure.
more information from our regulation COARA, which is student well-being and safety. There's a parental notification section which specifically speaks to parent notification in situations in which law enforcement is involved.
Okay,
So
yeah,
it is
and I felt
specific-
as
it
soon
is
as I said it, that was a
specific
bad example because I would assume we have something more set with law enforcement or maybe even medical issues. But part of my concern is I've heard from some parents, not so far long ago, about their child being brought in to discuss a behavioral issue or whatever. Well, they have an IEP that addresses that there are some known issues or whatever that the parents didn't feel that the school maybe knew off of the top of their head, and the kid got so upset by the discussion that he left school, and the parents are like, how did this happen? So I'm just trying to figure out whether or not there should be some sort of clarity policy-wise in terms of what, how we ensure that students are getting a fair representation for themselves, or that parents are getting fair notification. And again, I don't know the answer. Maybe it's not specifically a policy thing, But I do know that there are concerns about how we make the decision or how schools make the decisions to, when to contact the parents.
So I believe we can review the policy to look for areas where we can provide clarity on those. We do reference in multiple places communication with parents and guardians. And matters of special education have specific processes that school staff are required to follow. And I know those normally do entail communicating with parents and sometimes, of course, the assembly of an IEP team to review the behavior, often before any consequence takes place based on if it's, related to that student's disability.
Right. Of course, I would assume everybody knows that the student has an IEP or whatever. Dr. Daka?
Oh, about the IEP, it is incumbent upon the school to know what the student's IEP is. And if they don't, well, you can't know everything. But I think that is important because you want to know if the behavior is a manifestation of the disability. And the other question about the police, if it's so serious that you have to call the police, they come. You may not have time to call the parents, but they need to be notified as soon as possible because when the police are called, that's it. You do whatever they say. And I know that we're in negotiations right now with the police department on lots of our issues. And that may be one of the issues we need to talk about because I think in the policy it says that they will work with the administration on whatever actions are going to be taken.
Okay. Did anybody else have any questions or comments in reference to this specifically? Nope. Okie dokie. In that case, I will say thank you very much. If you wanted to just look at that one thing that you said you would do, we will move this to the full board then as well and take action at the board table. Right?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your work on this. And to Ms. Evans' point, thank you for the summaries and the time and care that you take into making sure that we understand, the overall feelings of our community on these issues. So that brings us to item number 5, if we would like to move on from there. Today we are also reviewing policy JHF in response to state law and a directive from the State Board of Education. In 2009, the State Board of Education developed a model policy prohibiting bullying, harassment, and intimidation at the direction of the Maryland General Assembly. The law also requires that the policy be updated regularly and that each local school system, revise their policies and submit it to the state superintendent. So today we will be reviewing this policy, the technical revisions that are being proposed in order to bring it into alignment with the State Board of Education's policy, model policy. Just for clarity for the public, this being a technical revisions, you all will be going through these with us and everything. It's not necessarily something that we need to, or it's not something that we would be putting out for public comment because the adjustments being made, so people fully understand, are to put us into alignment with the state's requirements. So while we do that, and I want you to go through the changes with us all here and for the public's information, I did want to note that, although that there is no requirement that we provide a public comment period, since they're technical revisions, I would like to ensure that our public is aware of the important changes that are being made. So I am going to ask that our board staff work with you all in the Office of the General Counsel and Communications to make sure that we have a strategy to elevate the changes for the public's awareness. And I also want to remind the public that when this comes to the full board for action, people can sign up and provide public comments during the public comments section of that board meeting if they would like to. That's, again, just all technical. But with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you all.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. Joining us at the table now are Mr. Edmondson from the Student Welfare and Compliance Unit and Dr. Grant from OTLS Curriculum and Instructional Programs and Ms. Miller from the Office of General Counsel. We are here today to explain the MSDE actions initiating this revision and to talk more about implementation strategies as they will be impacted by these revisions. And first, let me review some of what Ms. Mondrowski talked about, which is that Maryland law requires that the Maryland State Department of Education update its model policy on bullying every 5 years, and also required Maryland public schools to update their bullying policies by January 1. This was previously done in 2016, and MSDE published its model policy for 2021 just this past December, and requested an extension allowing local school systems to update their policies and submit to the state superintendent by February 15th. After receiving comments about the timeline from Maryland public school districts, MSDE revised this deadline to allow school districts to provide a draft to MSDE by February 15th and a final policy by March 31st. MCPS has complied with this requirement and sent the draft before you to MSDE on February 15th as required. And in a conversation with MSDE last Friday, staff received positive feedback on the draft as having met criteria for key components. You will recall that Policy BFA on policy setting, Section 3 addresses the process the board may follow in cases such as this, where the board is making amendments that are required to comply with federal, state, or local law. Policy BFA states that when the committee is recommending that the board adopt technical amendments to comply with federal, state, or local law, such technical amendments may be adopted by the board upon recommendation of this committee. And before we go over those technical amendments, Mr. Edmondson and Dr. Grant would like to answer the question that is likely on your mind, which is, what do these amendments mean for implementation? Can we have the slide deck, please? Next slide. Mr. Edmondson.
Okay, thank you. Before we get into the, as you mentioned, technical, and again, good afternoon, and thank you for having us. But until we get into the technical pieces of it, just to review some recent work that we have done in the school district with regards to bullying, harassment, and intimidation. As was referenced or mentioned earlier this afternoon, the board did adopt policy revisions to policy ACA, non-discrimination, equity, and cultural proficiency, as well as ACF, which is sexual misconduct and sexual harassment of students, last June of 2021. Built into those changes was also the revision of our protocols around hate bias and hate bias incidents that are reported within our schools in our district. We have, over the past 18 months, built an online version of our bullying report, which is Form 230-35, which is now online, and more than 80% of our bullying reports come in through the online version now. We've also enhanced our training in recognizing and reporting incidents of bullying. Those trainings included not only bullying in that process, but sexual harassment and intimidation, hazing, hate bias, incidents around student gender and LGBTQ issues. Those trainings included audiences of school-based and central office administration, athletic specialists, school counselors, student welfare liaisons, pupil personnel workers, school psychologists, ESOL transition counselors, behavioral specialists, social workers, as well as our students. Last year, if you recall, that we provided our 6th through 12th graders the first version of our Culture of Respect student training module, which went through many of these incidents and being able to recognize and report adequately. And on March 1st, we will be releasing the 2.0 version of that for this school year, which has been enhanced and provided with insight from our student feedback as well as from our schools. We've also streamlined resources in the past year and a half with regards to this work, including revising our quick reference guides for our school administrators and counselors to be able to learn and understand these policies and protocols more deeply and how to implement, as well as provided our communities with multiple ways to report, and it's actually a document that we have called Ways to Report, which provides 10 different ways for students to report an incident, either anonymously or otherwise. And then we have a new document this year that I'll actually talk about in a few slides, but it's a supportive measures plan. In the past, we've provided our schools with samples of what a safety plan looks like, and this year we were able to roll out an actual, a newly approved official form on student supportive measures plan. And we continue our work with our external partners, our state's attorney's office, our child protective services, Montgomery County Police, and we have been providing continuous webinars on to be able to connect with our students. Last December, right before winter break, we did a webinar working with Choose Respect on Let's Talk Consent, and there was more than 1,000 students who participated in that evening. You can go to the next slide, please. So to get into the technical pieces of this, and as you were speaking at the last section of this meeting, and as we've been talking through many of our meetings recently around the anti-racist audit and the hate bias incidents that we've been processing through, how do you apply technical solutions to adaptive challenges? And that's kind of a question that keeps coming up. This is technical work. I think it's really important that the board understands and that the committee understands that throughout the trainings that I mentioned, we provide the adaptive pieces to it. So even though it may not be written in a policy that you must call a parent at this time, what are best practices and what do you know about the family and what do you know about the situation? Because as we mentioned, the police situation, per the MOU, and if they're part of an investigation, we may not be able to contact the parent for that circumstance. So I was just thinking about how this all blends together.
Yes, it does.
But the per the as mentioned, the changes in section 7-424.1 of the annotated code of Maryland, there are several changes here. The definitions, language changes, reporting form changes, expanded investigative actions, aligning the motive. And so we have several slides, but I will not go into length or detail of them. As you can see from the model policy that was shared, if you want to go to the next slide, the model policy that was shared, you can very easily see the changes that are in red that will be in the future language of the work. So for example, and without reading to you the slides, 16 through 21, there was the current definition of bullying, a pattern or behavior when a person repeatedly uses power. And then if you change over to the model policy, you can see that there are some more criteria, some more clarification with regards to what the definition of bullying is. And to highlight just the two, the language of an imbalance of power comes into play, which wasn't there before. Another piece of this work is the repetition. And this is a conversation that we have on almost every bullying incident. Can a one-time incident be bullying? Well, yes, it could be, but per the state's definition, we also want to see if it's a repetitive behavior or if it's a one-time incident, how likely is it to be repeated with that offender and that victim. And so again, the adaptive parts of these technical definitions is really important work and how we look at each of these situations uniquely and individually. And you can see from the next slide, we have, again, more detail, more specifics around what bullying looks like, spelling out the electronic communication, cell phones, computers, tablets, multiple different ways that this can happen. Also adding in more of what we're seeing now with social media, with the gaming. So really getting more detailed and explicit on what this could and does look like when we have cyberbullying going on. Next slide, please. Also, and again, it was bullying, cyberbullying, harassment, and intimidation, which were the four main definitions that we were talking about with these changes. And again, harassment, what may have not been in there, what wasn't in there specifically was the immigration status, family and parental or marital status. What are the motives behind these things, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's gender expression. We've focused on gender identity through the policy, but now we're adding gender expression to this work. And with intimidation, really looking at not just subjecting an individual, but really using any type of communication or act directed towards that individual. Again, defining or spelling out more, what does it mean to be subjecting an individual to this? I'd like to turn it over to, briefly to Dr. Grant, who's going to share with us the comprehensive health education, and just to give you some of that context.
Thank you so much. Anytime I can get in front of a group of folks like you, I find myself very honored and humbled and fortunate, because then I'm highlighting some of the work that's being done in curriculum to get to our students, and is prevention, number one, prevention. So thank you for your time to speak today. What we're going to share right here, I have one simple slide, very big picture, but I'm going to give you a lot of depth of information verbally. And that is, health education is a priority. It is pre-K through high school. It is a tier 1. Every student has access, even non-diploma bound students, to health education. Wow. 8 years ago, could we say that? You know, we've made a lot of steps, so this is amazing. This is also in part with the governance with Msde that mandates comprehensive health education program, K-12, and then the COMAR mandates, which outline specific topics and content that are supposed to be taught. These topics and content that are to be taught include, that's right, bullying, harassment, and intimidation. And they've done the hard work for us by outlining the age-appropriate content and information. So it makes it really easy for us to look at that state-level framework document and say, oh, kindergartners and first graders, they need to know the difference between tattling and telling, right? They need to know what's bullying, how to identify that behavior, but also how not to be a bully. What are the appropriate communication strategies I need to have so when I'm at recess, I'm not bullying someone I want to be my friend, but I'm actually learning how to communicate appropriately. So it's like that bystander education is all of that. Another example would be in 5th grade. You know, what is an intimidating behavior? How are you putting that imbalance of power? You know, in middle school, getting into media and technology, more and more our students are younger with technology. How are we preparing them and preventing them from succumbing to these negative behaviors and hiding behind that device? And then in high school with the self-management. At all levels, there's 3 primary focuses, our foci, right? 1, what is the behavior we want students to do, and what's the behavior we don't want students to do? Whether it's bullying, harassment, intimidation. 2, how are we proactively teaching them to communicate, self-regulate, and identify those behaviors? So that way they're preventing them or identifying them. To then 3, be able to report the behavior or tell someone and keep telling someone until something is done to change behavior and enhance the overall climate. And that includes explicit instruction on all the 10 ways that you can report those behaviors. So lastly, I just really want to say thank you and for being able to help provide our students with health education, pre-K through 12, and really getting to highlight the curriculum that we're putting in place for our students, because these are tough times and the mental health is directly correlated to these behaviors. And a lot of our teachers or students are facing different things that they didn't face before. And it's putting policies like this into action that really help empower our students to know better, to do better, to be better. So thank you.
Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. So just briefly, and I'm not sure how interested you are in the changes to the forms, but spells out some of these changes on our form so that we do document and we have this information as schools are investigating and following up with next steps. For example, we've added whether it was a digital device, which wasn't there before, whether it was on or off school property. Next slide, please. Adding not only the, if there's an IEP for the student, for the victim, but also for the alleged offender, making sure that that is documented for both, as we don't we don't want to address one without the other. We want to make sure all of our students are handled appropriately and provided the supports that they need. Next slide, please. Just regards to some investigation actions, we've added information with regards to complainant and the respondent, making sure that we follow through with interviews and that we have those interviews and that those statements from multiple different people who may be witness or bystanders or involved, and this lists out more options available for our investigations. Next slide, please. And again, adding some of these things that I mentioned before to the form, the reporting form, aligning the motive with the definitions, again, on ethnicity, immigration status, and the like. The next slide shows you expanded incident locations. So again, not just on school property or on the way to school property, but where on school property, which will help us with our reporting as well as with our follow-up and our support for our students. So was it in the cafeteria? Was it in a classroom? There's different levels of supervision depending on where you are. So these are really important pieces of information that we really need and want to know. Next slide, please. Looking at outcomes, so following up with our 235-36 form, which is once the investigation's over and we complete the next part of the reporting requirement, making sure we include specifics in the outcomes as well as parent letters for both the alleged offenders and victims that are involved. And having the what those consequences were spelled out and listed out. And over the past year and a half, we've revised our parent letters that we provide to our schools with samples that they can make work and fit for their school and for their incident. And all of this has been incorporated into those letters to make sure we're spelling out exactly how it was handled and what the outcomes were for both and all involved. And then the next slide, again, expanding those interventions and supports. What restorative approaches are we taking into consideration? Also, how have we reached out to our parents? Was it a phone call, an email, a text? We want to make sure that we're documenting all of this information. And then the final slide will show you what I referenced earlier, how we are adding to the interventions, the school counseling piece of this, and the parent outreach of this, but also the supportive measures and the official form that we're using and providing for every incident that comes into our office. We're sending this out as part of the response and part of the materials that we provide our administrators so that they have these supportive measures plans, which again, were once called safety plans, in place so that all of these different suggestions and opportunities were considered as part of the work. And then I'll turn it back over to Ms. Percival.
Thanks, Mr. Edmondson. Ms. Davis will now walk you through some of the changes made to comply with the MSD model policy.
Okay, thank you. And I will try to jump right through. But the purpose update on the front is directly in alignment with what they ask us to put in the purpose section in the model policy. Page 2, you'll notice the updated references to cyberbullying. Middle of page 2, prohibited conduct. This is, how to explain this? In the 2016 model policy, the definition of bullying was this, and it was what is currently and remains in state law. So we have two things in effect. we have state law that still exists, and we have this kind of nuanced definition in the model policy. The prohibited conduct that is stated here is a where, when, and how much kind of criteria, and then the model policy is then a description. So prohibited conduct is, this is the state law, intentional conduct, and it has these other characters. It's intentional conduct, continues on the next page, creates a hostile educational environment, motivated by actual or perceived characteristics, or sexual in nature, or threatening and seriously intimidating, and then there are references to what constitutes sexual conduct. So those are all pieces of state law that have not changed. For the purpose of this policy, continuing on page 4, these are some other descriptors of bullying, harassment, cyberbullying, intimidation separately as laid out in the model policy. So I'm going to move over to page 9. You see updated language on professional learning, emphasizing the importance of adult visibility, especially during non-instructional activities such as lunch, recess, and hallway transitions, multi-tiered restorative approaches to improve school climate and reduce incidents of bullying, harassment, intimidation, and other factors that must be included in the professional development. I'm going to move over to page 11, which is where the model policy references the need for a school-wide evidence-based educational program, which Dr. Grant has detailed. And here we reference the comprehensive health education program, and then further providing opportunities for parents, volunteers, and the broader community to develop an awareness of bullying, harassment, and intimidation as a potential public health hazard, and then recognition and reporting of policy harassment and intimidations. That's a little bit of new language there. Following on the page 12, additional language to say, let's see, I'm at page 328, or line 328, programs that foster supportive peers who may be targeted or vulnerable to bullying, harassment, or intimidation. Did want to highlight on page 14 the reference to notifying parents and guardians of students at line 389. And I could detail it further, but those are the big highlights to focus on for now. I did want to reference in 2021, the state updated the COMAR categories for identifying individual characteristics. And so that is the expanded list that Mr. Edmondson was referenced, and that list is reflected in our policy ACA. So that is why at page 3, lines 69 to 71, we're referring out to policy ACA for that inclusive list. I will make this as a suggestion. I don't know if you would like us to repeat the list here. You know, we've been trying not to repeat the list every place, but refer to ACA so we can keep it consistent, you know, in case there are any further updates. But if you feel it's important, we can reproduce the list here as well. And with that, we are ready for your discussion and comments.
First of all, I want to say thank you. I know that this was an extensive technical alteration to have to make. Personally, I have great appreciation for the changes. I think that the additional clarity in the language of the definitions is critical. I think that the ways of reporting, I'm very excited to see, going back to the slide presentation, the changes in the reporting forms. You know, I think that I'm hopeful that this will help us to monitor, you know, where incidents are occurring, to whom they are occurring, even what time of the day, because, you know, there's a lot of discussion about issues arising after school, between the time of 3 and 5 o'clock, for example, and hopefully be able to help us monitor whether or not there's disproportionality involved in our disciplinary actions. I have a few things, but I feel like I should let my colleagues go first. But I do want to say I'm very, very pleased about the changing in the forms. I did have one question that I'm going to ask quickly before I turn it over to my colleagues, and that is about the, I think it was on page 14, the timeline for notifying parents. Not that this should be a surprise, page 15, sorry, at the top. Notified within 3 business days or 5 business days. That seems really extensive and excessive, in my opinion. Is that's what the law is requiring? And does MCPS want to consider adjusting it to making it a more timely notification?
I will begin that answer, and then I will encourage Mr. Edmondson to jump in. This is exactly what the model policy says,
Okay.
and my understanding is our procedures are much faster. So I will allow that, I will defer to that, but that is what it says. Mr. Edmondson, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, as a conversation, we've talked about
Yes.
that it's extensive and it shouldn't be the practice. It's just from the state's language. But again, the adaptive piece of this, how do we ensure through our trainings and how do we ensure what is reasonable? So notifying a parent that this is a situation and we will be investigating and getting back to you in 3 to 5 days is different than I'm not going to follow up with you for 3 to 5 days once I get this report. So that's part of the, I guess, the conversation that we have with our administrators and counselors and others who are involved at the school level on investigating. But again, I fully support any language from our local policies that say otherwise, less than 3 to 5 days.
Yeah, I'll leave it to my colleagues to think about. We can discuss it at the full board even, but if it were up to me, I would like us to alter that to what our MCPS expectations are, because that's the, we can do better than the minimum.
I can't be additive. No, we agree. It's
Okay.
again, notification, and then you do need time for investigation, and it depends. But
Yeah.
to let them know that something's going on is really important.
And my only other clarification comment is on page 9, and again, I pose this sort of to my colleagues, but under B, so line 250 on page 9, I know that we have made extraordinary efforts, including and architecturally, to ensure our locker rooms are monitored, but I feel like it should be labeled in here in terms of,
You're referring to the athletic supervisory plans
Yes.
after school?
yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can get the language from.
Somewhere in B, if you could just add that in, however you want to word it.
And all extracurricular activities.
Right, exactly, correct. Yeah, extracurricular activities as well. That's non-instructional activities, I guess, right? I was going to say, yeah, specifically like the locker room areas and areas where, we just know that kids need to be supervised would be great. Colleagues, anyone have questions or comments before I throw in my last thing? Dr. Doc?
Yes, I do have comments. I want to thank you for putting this policy together. I'm really very impressed at page 9, 10, 11, where these things happen, when they happen, and whether they're, all of that listed, I think is really very helpful. I think one of the most important parts of this is interventions and supports. And you mentioned all the people who might be involved in interventions. And I think it's important to have this policy because in the past, kids have complained about being bullied or being picked on, and teachers have said, just ignore that behavior. And we can't do that. And this is giving teachers and administrators a pattern to follow and to know that they just can't let it solve itself. It doesn't work that way, and that we are taking this very seriously. So I really do thank you for all of the work you've put in onto these parts. And cyberbullying, does our technology department assist with that? You know, who did it? You know, the cyberbullying, where did it come from?
So to the extent that we can investigate that, and whether or not many of those incidents may involve our police partners, but yes, our systems integration technology team is incredible and able to identify the devices that might have been used for certain situations. And I remember, we had an incident where location of a student who was, quote unquote missing. We were able to actually find the student several states away, thanks to Mr. McGee and our tech team, which is just incredibly skilled. So
I'm glad that we're really taking this seriously. And reporting isn't enough, but doing some of these other things and investigating is really important.
Ms. O'Looney?
Yeah, I have two questions. The first is much simpler to answer than the second. On slide 14, there's some edits made to the form for interventions and supports for respondents, and one of the additions is a restorative approach. Can we just add, in parentheses, a few examples of what that might look like? Because that's a relatively new thing.
yeah, I don't know if Dr. Grant wants to jump in, but the state's asking for much of whether it's restorative study groups, or whether it's circle groups, or whether it's in direct reference to some disciplinary action, which we know is always the best approach to that. But we consult with the Office of Student Family Engagement, our school psychologists, and our PPWs and others to either, like for example, in a recent incident where we might pull in study circles or student input groups to be able to help restore and heal in certain circumstances.
So can we add just a few of those examples, like study circles? Yep. Okay, just call them out. Okay.
Yeah.
And my second question is a bit more complex. There was a Supreme Court case in June about off-campus bullying, speech. How does that affect our work here with what we're able to identify and address using our bullying practices?
So yeah, we've incorporated that actual case into our training and helping our administrators understand and identify what is the extent of MCPS, or how long of the arm does it extend. And our conversations are around when it's brought into the school and affecting our students. That's where we obviously are very importantly get involved. But things that might happen off campus per Title IX regulations has not seeped in or even been reported into the school, much more difficult to be able to investigate as well as provide those supportive measures.
But we do still have the off-campus digital option on the form, so it can be addressed just depending on how much it impacts what happens in the classroom.
Right, and if you remember, as I referenced, just for the group, when we made amendments to policy ACF, which was sexual harassment, we actually split some of those definitions, and we called them sexual misconduct and sexual harassment, because some of them may not actually fall underneath Title IX regulation definition, but are still misconduct within our schools, our communities, and so that has actually given us more of an opportunity to be able to respond and to support.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, can you clarify what is, in terms of what happens off school property and, after hours at night, in terms of, like, to Ms. O'Looney's point, I've often heard concerns about what qualifies as a disruptive behavior, because what might disrupt my child, your kid might not care about, and how we are doing that.
Right, so there's definitely some subjectivity to the definitions and to the law. as well as to our policy, because how I interpret and how I feel about the way you treated me can be much different than how somebody else does. But it is the impact on their ability to access the education and the programming that we provide in the schools, as well as the extracurriculars. So there really looks at impact of individual circumstances and situations to be able to define exactly whether it falls along the lines of Title IX or whether it's just misconduct, and we would take it through the code of conduct, through the student code of conduct document.
Is that?
Yeah, sure. No, so thank you for this. I also wanted to acknowledge Dr. Grant. Thank you for coming here today. I think it's really important that we highlighted what's the work being done in the health curriculum and just an example of the policy, like the action following the policy. So, and then thank you for raising what our students are going through. I don't, everybody wants us to quickly get back to normal, but I don't know that we can do that, right? And so it's been a transition, a huge transition for our students around their mental health, and if nothing more, just having been virtual for 18 months and then coming in person and kind of re-engaging with students and with the adults, right, for a full day and trying to kind of get back into that mode. So I'm glad you're at the helm doing the work. And I know you have 3 kids in our school system, so you understand and you know firsthand, right? And so just thank you for the work that you always do. It's not very often that we see you come to the table, but I know that you're doing great things throughout our system, and just wanted to say thank you for coming today and just sharing briefly, but we know that you're doing a lot behind the scenes. So thank you.
Thank you, and it takes a great team to do it, and the support of the board and the support of the inter-office collaboration. I work across a lot of different offices, and I'm always welcomed and supported because we keep our kids first, and that's the priority, and their health and well-being is so critical. But I also wanted to give a special acknowledgement to my colleague Teresa Schatzer, who's a health education content specialist. That really does grind behind the scenes, goes to state professional leadership networks to really make sure that we're cutting edge, that we're getting the best for our kids in Montgomery County too. So, but thank you for that acknowledgement. It really is the whole team here, because when the laws change and then they tell me and the language changes and then it goes in here, and it takes this team effort to really make it work for our kids. But thank you.
Absolutely. So to relate to the team, you're here. So so when we say thank you to you, we mean everybody behind the scenes doing that work as well. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. I too want to thank you for your work. The work that we're doing with our health literacy skills and all of that is so critical, to Ms. Evans' point about, particularly I know there's such a growing concern and need for mental health supports and things like that, and incorporating this, these issues into our health curriculum helps destigmatize and helps kids get started learning about and understanding mental health issues and things like that at a very young age. My one question for you is in reference to partnerships. I know that we have the Family Justice Center, for example, offers a Choose Respect program where they will go in and teach the class for the teacher. So they do their own training. They're all, and just as I understand it, has sort of been done based on if a health teacher hears about it and is interested in it, they can participate in having someone from the Family Justice Center come in and do the presentation. But anything we can do to help spread the word that this is something out there. I think that, it's a very important aspect of making sure that our children are staying safe, and incorporates the bullying stuff, the intimidation, I should say, aspects of things as well. So that's a really good program. I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yes, it is an ongoing partnership, and each year we are communicating more and more with our schools about the opportunity to bring in those guest speakers that are content matter experts in the field. in high school, and we really are trying to get them into middle school as well. COVID kind of put a little hiccup in our journey, but we definitely are, they gave us some virtual options when we were virtual to make sure that kids had access to that content. And then it is with curriculum, we try to put out the resources and give teachers those options. So, but we are still moving forward. The partnership is just getting stronger and stronger each year with the goal to get to every school for Choose Respect, and that's the sexual harassment, sexual violence, consent. The yes means yes, not just, I didn't say anything, so we're gonna go to the movies, right? No, I didn't say yes, so we're not gonna go to the movies. Or whatever context that is, but the partnerships are critical, and even just in my own walk of life, because of that partnership with Family Justice Center, I had a girlfriend who was going through a domestic violence situation, and I was able to take her to the Rockville Family Justice Center to get help. And the security team here, because she worked in the building, was able to support her in case that person came up to this building. So even though it's supposed to be for pre-K-12, but the work we do does help staff and teachers. So it just really does all. It overlaps with mental health. It overlaps with sexual consent. It overlaps with so many things, but at the core is the person, and the person could be any of us, so.
I've heard so many stories about when they've done presentations where kids will come up after the class and say, it's not me, but I do have a friend whose family seems, to be struggling and whatever, and then they can do some outreach. So I appreciate the work that you're doing with all of that so much. I know that a lot of parents have asked about having a mental health course be a graduation requirement. I've tell them continually that we have a top-notch team of people like yourself working to make sure that it's incorporated in every year and that it's being genuinely addressed. And so I appreciate the work that you do there. My only other question, and then I have one comment, is do parents get a copy of these reports when they're made? And that's sort of the question in terms of, I know you're notified, but do they get an actual copy of the report? I'm assuming not.
The bullying report?
Yeah,
So the parents are-
or whatever, incident reports.
Oh, so the parents are actually encouraged to complete it themselves with students. I mean, they're the initial report. And then if parents or students are uncomfortable completing the report, the school will fill it out, and parents have access to that. Possibly not the follow-up -36 form, but all the information from that will be in their letter, the follow-up bullying letter. Because there might be some confidential information from the follow-up from the administration that might not be able to share with one parent or another, but.
So you're saying this is separate than the reports that the schools fill out? Like an incident report or school? So if I'm a child at school X, Y, and Z, I go in and I say, I'm having an issue with this, or this happened to me, the school fills out a report, correct?
So they'll work with the student to fill out the bullying report, because if they're alleging that they're being bullied. And yes, parents would have access to the information.
Okay. Well, my comment really is in reference to reporting, like, this is exciting and good, and I think it's great, but of course, our work is only as good as we fulfill. So if we don't report, if we're under-reporting, or if we're not reporting, then we're not going to be able to implement change and effectuate change. And so with that, I don't know if this is a policy question or just for overall, but kind of helping to keep track also of which schools, are having, higher reports than others, mainly because it's not so much that I think things are happening more at one school so much than any of the others. It's that I worry about us not reporting appropriately. So for whatever that's worth, I'm just putting it out there. Okay.
I was going to ask, can someone speak to, in regards to Mrs. Mondrowski's questions, that if a student goes home and tells a parent that they've been bullied or harassed, and the parent calls the school, then will the school direct them to the report? Yeah, so
they'll send them the online link to fill out, which will start the process. And if the parent says, I'm not filling it out, just, I'm telling you what I'm telling you, then the school will fill out that information and enter it.
And in some schools too, Mrs. Mondrowski, I think, because I have a student in school, like when you go in the main office, they'll have like this rounder, and they have
Oh, yeah.
all these different forms in there, like
I've done my
right
kids'
immediately,
schools, too.
yeah. I didn't know if you were referencing that we should just send people the report, or, okay, I was just trying to make
Saying
sure.
if it's something's officially recorded, I just, want to make sure that,
And part of the communication, even recently, when we sent out the ways to report, we actually have that all linked, so everything's right there for the parents. We sent out one in December, a blast to all parent communities in December on the ways to report. It included all those different links, and they're in multiple languages.
oh, great.
Are they on the school's websites too?
Yes, they should be. They're on, Montgomery County website, and they're on the bullying website, and they're on the student welfare and compliance website. I don't know if they're on individually, on every single school. I couldn't speak to that.
We should try and ensure that
Yeah,
happens.
we should.
Because a lot of parents don't even think to go to MCPS's website, they just go to their schools. Because that's the world that we live in, our bubble. So, all right, well, if nobody has anything else, I will say thank you very much to all of you for your work on all of these policies, your time presenting to us, and we will move this on as well to the full board for final action with a couple of those minor changes that we discussed. So, does anybody have any other comments or wrap-up issues, questions, discussion? No? All right, well then, I will call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.